ActionSA Afrika Eastern Cape chairperson Athol Trollip has praised President Cyril Ramaphosa for referring University of Fort Hare corruption and fraud allegations to the Hawks. He says this outlines the seriousness of the matter. Trollip joins us for more on this. All right, Athol Trollip, good evening and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me on the program.
All right. Let's start on that. This is an issue that many people have been raising and looking at it to see if, what will come out of this. You're saying that this is a good move as far as the president is concerned. Tell us about and why you say that, Athol.
Well, first of all, let me just say, I think it's tragic that the state of our universities across the country are as chaotic as they are. I mean, hardly a university in South Africa is not blighted by corruption and internal maladministration. And Fort Hare University, unfortunately, which is an iconic university in the country and certainly in our province, has been beset with the most unbelievable shenanigans. People have been assassinated. There have been attempted assassinations, and there's massive corruption. And over and above that, unfortunately, there have been allegations of degree fraud and degree scam where high-profile political figures are involved. So we were very pleased when the president issued a proclamation for the Special Investigative Unit to go and investigate the goings-on at Fort Hare University, but we were dumbstruck when Premier Mabuyane got an interdict to prevent the president's proclamation being applicable to him and him studying for a master's degree and a doctorate degree without any postgraduate degree qualification. So we are really dumbfounded by what's happening here, and the silence of the president on this matter is a matter of enormous concern for us in the Eastern Cape and for ActionSA.
When you look without specifically looking at the matter of Mabuyane or Fort Hare, would you say that this is a serious problem that we as South Africans need to look into? Because, reports have been saying that's about 640 fake degrees from public officials, people who are in public service. Over the years, we've seen many cases from as far as ambassadors and people who are claiming to be doctors, CEOs and COOs of different companies. How do you think this affects us as South Africa and also the state of education?
Look, I think it's a crisis, really. The fact that UNISA has now been placed under administration is another indication of how bad things are at tertiary education. We've seen what's happened with NSFAS funding for students who can't afford to go to university but who qualify for funding. It's just been a complete disaster. Even last week, the SRCs from various universities were having a protest at the union buildings about the chaos in the NSFAS funding. And it's really unfortunate that in the Eastern Cape, for example, the Walter Sisulu University has for many years now, probably 4 or 5 years, a number of their degree qualification courses have not been accredited. So what that means is that students have been studying legitimately and authentically and were studying really hard and making all sorts of sacrifices, and their parents sacrificing them to send them to university. And after their 4 years of study or 3 years of study, they're told that the accreditation is not up to date, therefore they can't graduate with their degree. Now, to me, that just speaks of a complete state of chaos in our tertiary education institutions. And I must make a comment about that. We've got 2 departments of education in this country, one for basic education and one for tertiary education. Both of them have been led by ministers who should have long ago been in the pension paddock. Both of them have been led into complete destruction by the 2 said ministers, Angie Motshekga and Bladen Zamande. But they stay in their positions, whether matric pass rates go down and whether you now pass matric with a 30% pass rate and whether students can get proper degrees at accredited universities. It's a complete state of chaos. And all the fingers point back to Cyril Ramaphosa, who just never does anything about anything. And in this case, we were so excited that he was going to really finally do something about Fort Hare. And then the person who helped him to become the president in the last ANC conference, Oscar Mabuyane, interdicted his own president and the own president of his party and the president of the country. So, it's reminiscent of Jacob Zuma kind of stuff, where people say they want their day in court to, prove their innocence. But they do everything in their power to prevent themselves getting to court to have to answer the questions. And the question is simple. Did Oscar Mabuyane qualify to do a master's degree? Has he qualified from the master's degree to do his doctoral thesis without a postgraduate degree? And the same goes for Notolo Kivit, who's now a minister in Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet. Her silence on this matter is completely deafening. And the worst thing is that the president's silence is deafening.
Would you then say, Athol, as you say, that the president not responding to some of this, but an understanding that Oscar Mabuyane did challenge this in court over the SIU and their mandate in this regard, would you then say that it's more of a political matter than an institutional matter, or is it the institutions themselves that are, bogus or running, these institutions running themselves like, with fake degrees, as it were? Is it an institutional problem or a political problem?
Look, I think it's both. Absolutely, I think it's both. The universities, the administration of universities across this country has really become an embarrassment for the tertiary institutions. Many people who are lecturers, senior lecturers, deans of faculties have been found to be in possession of fraudulent degrees. That's a real problem. And in this particular case that we're talking about now, even the person running the program, the department, his degree qualifications and tertiary qualifications are called into question. But here's the other side of this thing. We've got high-profile politicians who are studying at university, courtesy of the taxpayer. They have not paid anything towards their studies. And they study apparently phony or bogus degrees. And those degrees elevate them in the standing of the ANC and in cadre deployment programs, because the more degree qualifications you have, the better chance you have in the ANC, because everyone is starting to call into question the cadre deployment policy. Now you need a little bit more than just being a good cadre. You need some degree qualifications. So how best to do that? You manufacture yourself a program where you can enroll and award yourself these degrees with, some good chummies at a university. And that's just not good enough, because the man in the street who has to send their children to university to get degrees to get along in life has to make extraordinary sacrifices to send their children to universities. And they have to pay and pay and pay and pay. And many of the students who are receiving NSFAS funding have to wait and wait and wait for that funding. Whereas politicians and high-profile individuals in the ANC can simply enroll themselves at degrees, at universities to get these degrees that elevate their standing in public life and in the ANC, and they don't qualify for that. And we believe in ActionSA that that's simply not good enough, and it's tantamount to the current premier and the past premier. It reminds me of Nero fiddling while Rome was burning. So instead of helping themselves to fraudulent degrees, these two individuals should be doing everything in their power to make sure that the universities that they are attending are functional and operating well and facilitating the proper, authentic degree qualifications of young South Africans trying to get ahead in life.
We'll continue our conversation with ActionSA Eastern Cape chairperson Athol Trollip, who has praised President Ramaphosa for referring University of Fort Hare corruption and fraud allegations to the Hawks, but he says more could be done. Athol, just picking up on where we left at the conversations, I mean, as much as there's been moves, as you say, that the president has done, but what do you think should be ideally the process from here on? Because the SIU did start their investigation, as it were.
Well, first of all, I just want to clarify, there's absolutely no praising for President Cyril Ramaphosa. I think Cyril Ramaphosa did what was required of him when he made a proclamation that invited the SIU to investigate what's been going on at the iconic Fort Hare University around fraud and corruption and attempted murder and assassinations. So I think that's any president would have and should have done that. What is a major concern is that one of the premiers of the province has been embroiled in an alleged fraudulent degree scam or scheme, and he has challenged his own president to prevent the investigation into himself. Now, to me, that is where the real problem is, because we expect national leaders and provincial leaders to be beyond reproach. And when we talk about ethical leadership, we would expect that people who have been involved in alleged fraudulent degree qualification scams, that they would do everything in their power to appear before the courts of this country to absolve themselves by bringing the facts to the table. What Oscar Mabuyane has done is the contrary. He has now interdicted the president and the SIU from investigating himself. And I said it's reminiscent of Jacob Zuma, who for the last 21 years has been saying he wants his day in court, but spending hundreds of millions of rands of taxpayers' money to stay out of court. Now, we in ActionSA say we are not going to allow Premier Mabuyane or his predecessor, Athol Trollip, to spend taxpayers' money to prevent the scrutiny of the courts examining whether their degrees that they've received from this university are actually bona fide or fraud degrees or phony degrees. We are going to do everything in our power to hold them to account and to insist that the president follow through on his proclamation to the SIU to extend the investigative authority to examine phony degree scheme at Fort Hare University. So that's the very least we expect.
And just finally then, I mean, as you say that the scope should have been a little bit more. How much then should we go beyond issues like Fort Hare? Because there's many other institutions. I mean, you mentioned, for instance, a UNISA that is currently under administration. How far should we spread the scope beyond just the people that we are aware of, but also looking at other fraudulent and possible fraudulent degrees and diplomas that have been issued, maybe not even to public officials?
Well, you know, the excitement around the proclamation issued by the president to the SIU about Fort Hare University is that the one thing about the law is that once a case is investigated and is prosecuted and there's a conviction, then you have legal precedent. That makes all the other investigations that much easier. And that is why we were excited about the president's proclamation. We are much less excited, in fact disappointed now, that the president seems to have withdrawn his neck and his head back under the shell because one of his own have challenged him. And we expect the president to be beyond that kind of challenge and to stare down Oscar Mabuyane and say to him, listen, if you have nothing to hide, go let the SIU or the Hawks investigate your degree or the process of your enrollment into this degree. And you know, they're getting himself into possibly being entertained on a PhD. Now, that's simply unacceptable because once politicians undermine the whole tertiary education system for self-aggrandizement, then everything gets called into question. And then all of a sudden, you know, all the qualifications from South Africa will be held under a microscope when people are trying to operate globally in the global job market. And people will just say, we can't trust South African degrees, you know. Let me give you a classic example. There are many countries in this world who we didn't used to require visas to go to. Now we have to get visas to go to many of the countries that had visa exemptions because there's been such prolific fraud activity in getting visas to travel abroad in South Africa that people no longer regard South African visas to be trustworthy. The same thing is happening with our university degrees, and that's an absolute shame. And I believe that the youth and the future of this country who are studying legitimately and bona fide courses at university, they need to be protected so that they know whatever effort they put in at a university will ultimately give them a qualification that is recognized internationally and that doesn't have a big question mark over it.
Fantastic. Athol Trollip, thank you so much for coming through to talk to us. That is Athol Trollip, ActionSA Afrika Eastern Cape provincial chairperson, talking to us there about the issue of bogus degrees and, well, the investigation that the president did, well, instruct to a certain extent, but there's been some challenges from as far as the Premier Oscar Mabuyane is concerned. Now,